Hi, y'all are. I'm glad for you to see me today, I guarantee. This is Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, with another episode of my podcast, The Cajun Counselor. Laissez le bon temps rouler. Hi, y'all are. I'm glad for you to see me today, I guarantee. Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, with a very special guest today, my good friend, and we share a lot of passion around a number of subjects, but one of them is blended families. And I want to introduce Emily Bouchard, who really needs no introduction. Emily, how are you?
I'm doing great, Paul. It's such a treat to get to be with you. You are one of my favorite people to talk to about blended family estate planning, step family, finances, purposeful prenups. It's just wonderful what we've done in our careers since we met. Gosh, what was it, 2011? I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine it's been that long,
That's
but
it's
yeah.
15. That's up coming on 15 years. And a lot has changed, but an awful lot has stayed the same, hasn't it?
Yes.
And I guess just a quick minute. When Emily and I met, Personal Planning Institute's initial rendezvous, which was at like an airport hotel, and there were like 75 people there. Emily and I discovered our interest in blended family planning and just blended families in general, but blended family estate planning. And I
Yeah.
said, well, I'm almost done with a book about the subject. So we talked, and then it's like, well, if you'd like for me to look over, and comment on some of your chapters, I said, oh, I would love that. And then the thought occurred to me, you know what? I need Emily as a co-author. So I had to go back to the publisher. The publisher said, as long as you meet the December 31st submission deadline, we're good. So we added Emily. And as luck would have it, at the time, I was living in Napa, California,
Oh, that's right.
and Emily was living in Marin County, 45 minutes away. So we were able to I would go to Emily's and we would write. And of course, we had to insert her voice and, because I was 90% done with that book. Emily added a really great chapter on communication, but we submitted that. Do you remember submitting that thing? Like we were at some place, and we had to, and it was slow Wi-Fi. We were watching the submission go and go and go, and finally the whole book, couple hundred pages, was sent. But I think it was the last day of the year when we
It was pretty exciting. Yeah, we were able to, it was great because you're so technically knowledgeable and you have such great wisdom and wonderful stories. And then basically by coming together, I was able to ask you questions like, okay, so if somebody's never heard of these terms before, what would be the best way to say this? Or how can they put this into action? So we created those action steps in the chapters, and we really did outtake boxes and made it a really user-friendly book. And it's so funny, y'all, just to give you a sense of how ancient history 2012 was. We were so state of the art. We had a CD-ROM in the back of our book, Estate Planning for the Blended Family, that had all kinds of checklists and recommended handouts that people could use to support them in their blended family estate planning, like when you have step family issues and how to think it through before you start working with your attorneys. And now it's like, I mean, what we do, you can use it maybe as a Frisbee,
right.
So funny. And since that time, Paul's updated the information and wrote an amazing book on Yours, Mine, and Ours, which is the latest iteration of that. And he was able to do that on his own because I wasn't able to rejoin him. He invited me to, but I wasn't able to. But I highly recommend that book to anyone who has a step family and wants to do their estate planning right.
I know you're very, very busy, but if you ever wanted to collaborate on beyond Yours, Mine, and Ours and deal with because we barely scratched the surface
Mhm.
and really only stuck to the planning part of it more.
Mhm.
But all the other family issues and everything else, that might be a really good book to sort of, go beyond. Because remember, Yours, Mine, and Ours, which I named, my book,
Mhm.
is only one of the 6 archetypes of blended families that you and I identified in our book. And it's, the Yours, Mine, and Ours is only one of the 6, and it's not even probably the
Mhm.
largest. The empty
Yeah.
nester today is probably one of the biggest. But let's start.
Mhm.
A lot of times when you're in a blended family,
Mhm.
and you and I have both been there, and we're both alums now, okay, essentially alums of
Oh,
them,
yeah, I'll
okay?
think about it that way, yeah.
Right, yeah, that's right,
That's
kind of,
funny.
but, there's always an actuarial possibility that either one of us could end up in another one, so who knows?
Highly likely if I mean, at our advanced age, the next person we might get involved with would likely have children. Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, it's one of those it's one of those things to where, people who will say, like, never about anything. I have a great door hanger that says, "We make plans, God laughs."
Yeah.
So I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but the wisdom I take from that is never say never.
Yeah. I say always and never are 2 words that automatically let you know that
Right,
something may not
yeah,
be accurate there,
there's a
yeah.
there's a
Mhm.
there it's gonna end up badly. But here's to me, when you're in a blended relationship and the thought turns to estate planning,
Mhm.
too often, I think people select an estate planner without thinking about why. And it's not whether it's that estate planner versus B, it's should we be represented together? And because I'm going to tell you, continuing to write about, the horrific litigation, and it just breaks your heart, to read this stuff. Everybody gets jazzed up about the legal issues. I can, the older I get, Emily, the more heart side and the less technical
Yeah.
side, I have. I mean, I've really, you know,
Mhm.
so it breaks your heart. But when you look at them and you sort of do a forensic audit of the facts, you're like, why were these people jointly represented when there was
Yeah.
so much to lose? You and I
Yeah.
wrote an article.
Oh, the guest piece that we did on Forbes years ago?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, you
Yeah.
remember that one? Um,
Sure.
and what we talked about was essentially not only the benefits of joint versus separate representation,
Mhm.
but
And why you would choose one versus the other.
right,
Yeah.
but remember the signposts of, even though a couple, and this is where lawyers, and hopefully we'll have some estate planning lawyers watching us, when people come in, you shouldn't be quick to accept them jointly. And we had a list of signposts of the need for separate representation, irrespective of what they say or say they want.
Mhm.
Okay.
You gonna review those?
Yes. And
All right. Let's give
I'll
people some
remind you
value
of
right
them.
away. I love it.
One of them, and this was my case. One partner is childless. One partner does all of the talking or seems to exert control over the other.
Oh, that doesn't happen, right? We never see that.
I was always the devil's advocate. because as soon as I saw that, the first sign of either the stifle or the old Archie Bunker, stifle yourself, Edith, um, or a hand gesture, or
Mhm.
zip it, any of that, I would immediately turn to the person who was the recipient of that signal, and I wouldn't question them. I'd ask them a different question, and they're like, "Oh, well, I wasn't shut up about that," but it was always a way to kind of get in the back door, because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take what you ask them, they start to answer, and then they address, because now they've got the floor.
Mhm. It gives
And
them
what they
another
were
way, yeah.
told to shut up on, I had people walk out of the office about that.
Oh, for sure. It's such an interesting thing in terms of couples and communication, and, um, I always think that people have the best of intentions, right? I'm always looking at what's the positive intent for why they would want them to be quiet or what it is, and I'll often normalize the experience that couples will have. And I want to be really clear. While Paul's coming to this conversation with legal background and knowledge that is like first class, I come at this from a family dynamics, social work, former licensed marital and family therapist perspective. So that head and heart piece is something we are having this conversation, like bringing both together. And when a dynamic like that with a couple shows up in your office, or if a couple's aware of that, it's really important to get a sense for what's behind that, right?
Correct.
Like what's the concern if this person were to speak up, or what is it that you're worried might happen if their perspective might be different, or if they have something to add. And I always like to slow things down. I love how you give a venue and a back door. I'm also aware that sometimes there can be a worry about repercussions, right? So if I bring this up in this, am I going to, have to deal with some fallout later on with my partner?
Mhm.
So if you're an advisor and you're sitting with a couple and one of them is like nodding but not saying very much, or you might want to look at how to possibly have a meeting separately with them and get their concerns, or highly recommend separate representation so that that person actually does get represented in the conversation around the future. And but always with the sense of the best interest of both of the couples and the family as a whole.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, if a blended family couple inquired about me representing them, I had a two-part engagement letter
Mhm.
where I had to meet with them together and each separately. And then if I determined that I could represent them jointly, I would. But
That's
I
great
had,
'cause it sets up the understanding right out the gate that you're gonna meet with each of them individually. I think that's brilliant.
well, you know, it's so easy to fall into a conflict of interest. Let me get to
Yeah.
a couple more
Okay.
of these
Sure.
signposts. Short length of the relationship, not always determinative, but if it's combined with number of past relationships that is on the up number, I start to think about
Mhm.
Bobby Blue Bland's song, "Who Will the Next Fool Be?"
Oh, yeah.
And what do you think about either of
You know,
those?
one of the things I like to do is really get to know the couple and ask, how did you guys meet? And get there's different stories about it and see how they do that story together, right? Do they have different iterations of it? And it's a relatively short relationship, but you find out that they've known each other for 40 years and that they both are widow and widower and they knew each other's part. It's like, oh, this is a natural. They already know. But if it's,
High
oh,
school
yeah.
sweetheart back together at the reunion. I don't know how many times I've heard that
Oh,
story.
yeah. That one you wanna, like, make sure that you know who this person is now,
Right.
but I do think that if they say, "Oh, yeah, we met at the casino last week, and we're ready to go to the Elvis Chapel and get married," it's like, "Oh, well, thanks for stopping in with me first, and let's talk about a
Right.
prenup first before we do anything else." So, you kinda get the context, you get what are the history there, and, really, what is it that has them saying, "We wanna be together for a long time," or, "We have been together for a short time, but we wanna blend all of our resources together in our estate plan?" What just getting that contextual data is so important.
Let me ask you this, Emily, because I don't get, this anymore. What about
Mhm.
online relationships? Has that started? I mean, are there? See, I wouldn't be caught dead doing that, but it's.
Well, watch out for that, that never always thing.
Oh no,
So,
no, no! Well, I
you
get
never
that.
know.
I
Yeah.
get that. I
Yeah,
get that.
yeah.
But to me, it just looks like such a potential breeding ground for nefarious people. It's like the Lonely Hearts Club
Yeah.
2.0.
Yeah. It
But
there's
if a couple came to you
yeah.
and said, "Oh, well, we've just physically met, but we've had an online relationship for
Mhm.
5 years." Um, any particular? I mean, I'm asking just with
Oh,
curiosity
I'm
because
I'm
I've
all
never even
about
thought about it.
yeah, if it's been long distance and it's just been online, it's really important to take some time to get to know each other in person. I'm a real advocate for, like, cohabitation agreements, for starting off slowly, don't need to blend everything right away. If they did rush into getting married because they're so excited and they just moved to the new city, it's like, okay, what do we need to look at short term and long term to do some protections out the gate that could be eased up over time as they discover, who they are
Right.
actually as a couple in person, because there's like the relationship in your head, and then there's a relationship with who that person actually is that you really want to discover.
No,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. All right, here too, disparities, age
Mhm.
disparity, and significant disparity in wealth or income.
Yeah. I think the second one's really a challenge, right? Because if one person has a tremendous amount of resources and the other one doesn't or comes with lots of debt, and you're looking at the representation you're going to have, even if you do separate representation, how's a person without any of the money going to be funding that? And how does that work? I'd love for you to share a little bit about that because I think we've worked with a lot of couples where that's been an issue. And how do you have it be actual personal representation when it might be paid for by the other person?
Well, that part of it, I solved that problem when I used to get people lawyers by getting people lawyers who I respected and
Mhm.
who were not simply going to rubber stamp what I did. You know me, Emily.
Mhm. Oh,
Uh, I detest yes men. I've
mhm.
never been one. I don't want to be surrounded by people. I want people who have the guts and the transparency. Say, Paul, you're out in left field on that. You're just
Yeah.
wrong about that. Because I listen, like me, I'll change my mind. When I'm presented with a better case on anything,
Mhm.
I will flat change my position. I did that when I lived out in California on gay marriage. I mean, I'd come up with the traditional Roman Catholic view of it, but when I got out there and I started thinking about it and looking at our Constitution, I voted against it in Cal. Remember the proposition we had, Gray Davis
Mhm.
come up to that ultimately was declared unconstitutional in Windsor and the Obergefell cases. I voted against it. We lost. California voted to define marriage as between one man and one woman. And I voted against that then. But that had not been my position in life coming up, primarily
Mhm.
because of Catholicism. But
Yeah.
it's not just it wasn't just a matter of that, it's the Constitution.
It's great that you're bringing that up because I think one of the things that's happened in the world, especially since we wrote the book the first time, is a whole expansion into this phenomenon of modern families. So it's much more so than blended families. Like step families are one way that you can have your family dynamic be, but another would be couples that are choosing to be together but never get married, right? And they can be of the same gender or different genders. We
That
know.
is the fastest growing segment in the
Mhm.
according to the census.
Oh, not
Remember
choosing to be
blended
together but not married.
blended family um blended families are now the most. Well, they were in the 2010 census. For our book, it was repeated in
Mhm.
2020, but in the
Yeah,
2020 census, the fastest growing segment is the committed unmarried couple.
yeah, yeah,
Now, I'm going to
and
write a book about estate planning for them. It's going to
I
be in
think
the
that's so
series.
important, and then there's also polyamorous couples, a couple we're living so much longer, and there's a
Was it
sense of wanting to
thruple? What do they call? Is it
stay yeah, stay
thruple?
committed to one person, but expand the relationship, and what does that estate plan look like? A colleague of ours, Michael Blacksburg, was telling me about, a throuple with 3 men and they were in 3 different generations, and they were working on a really unique estate plan that took care of each of them and their needs and given their ages, their length of relationship together, and future concerns. And it's like, oh, I just love being able to bring that forward because whenever you are an attorney, whenever you are thinking about doing an estate plan, really be in reality about who are the people that are going to be impacted by this and in what degrees, and who are the stakeholders that are going to need to be informed and aware of their roles and responsibilities within the plan and how to best prepare everybody, especially when there might not be norms in our culture yet that have really identified these. And we have gender fluidity now too, right? Where we might have somebody that might enter into the marriage as one gender and then become another gender later on in the marriage. And oh, what needs to change in the language of the documents to reflect that, or that sort of thing. So
Yeah, and also, I've seen a couple of trusts written by, I mean, obviously I don't write them anymore, but I see them a lot, disinheriting kids or grandkids who change genders.
yeah, there's been things in the media about that for sure
So
too. Yeah, and that's what people that are really attached to like you were able to advance and expand your awareness, and kind of honor your roots, but go into a different angle. But some people are really committed to their religious beliefs and their moral ethics, and that if something goes against that, they will use their estate plan to express that.
well, I,
Yeah.
I still have my, and I'll go back to Tevye the milkman and Fiddler on the Roof. Remember the question? He says, on the
Mhm.
one hand, there is no other hand, about whether his daughter could marry someone outside of the
Oh.
Jewish faith. And on the one hand, there is no
There's
other
no
hand.
other hand.
I have some of those
Mhm.
beliefs, but not about that. That's not, you know, it's like, okay, can they marry?
Mhm.
And like, well, equal protection of the laws would seem to tell me that irrespective of how I feel about it, they have it, okay? And the
Yeah.
court the
Mhm.
court did a good job of, of squaring that. You know, I mean, I have reservations about it socially, for societal impacts about children and,
Mm.
how they're raised and whatnot. But that's that's not enough for me to say no. I
You
mean,
know what's
I'm gonna change, so yeah, I got a few of those. Let
But
me
no, I wanna say one thing about this because I think it's important to think about the era we're in and, that we're evolving as a species, as human beings, and when I was a child, when I was born into my family, I was
Mhm.
born into a family that was blended on a couple of different levels, and one is and I don't know if you saw, but I just interviewed my father who's 91, and he was talking about, what it was like for him to grow up with Jewish parents that were immigrants that fled, um, oppression in Europe, um, and my dad married my mom who was, from a Protestant family in Connecticut, and definitely nothing Jewish in her background. And I asked him, I was like, how was it meeting her family for the first time? And, way back then. And he reminded me that my mom's mom divorced my mom's father when my mom was 7 because he was an alcoholic and he was not providing for the family the way my grandmother thought he should. So that's way back. My mom was born in 1936, right?
Mhm.
So when she was 7, what would that be? 40, like
3 during World War
43,
II.
right? Right. So my grandmother divorced him during a time when women did not divorce, right? Like that was a very unusual thing. She met somebody and he had 2 daughters. He was a widower. So when I was born, I had a step grandfather and 2 step aunts, and it was our blended family. It was never a question that they were as much a part of my family as my blood relation uncle that was my mom's brother. That was their family. So in that instance, it was like 2 religions were blended and family systems were blended, and it was I had no idea. When thinking back on it, it's like as a kid, I didn't realize, but it was so progressive, right? On many levels. And
But it
I,
worked, didn't it?
it did. It totally worked. Yes.
See,
So I think that, mhm,
I'm that way. I'm a firm believer in family by choice,
mhm,
and that has been a great thing.
yeah. J. Hughes called a family of affinity, right?
Yeah,
We get to choose that. Yep.
the disparity is one thing, but what about economic dependence of one on the other? I've seen that happen in a lot of different ways,
Mhm.
not just not just money. Maybe they're feeding some form of almost addiction.
Um,
Sometimes it's they're feeding them compliments.
hmm.
But there's a dependence. That
Well,
that bothers me, trying to
it
represent 2 people, one of whom is dependent on the other.
Yeah, and it's a really tricky one in step family situations, right? Like a common scenario is a spouse is completely dependent on the other. And if that one that they're dependent on passes away and they have children from a prior relationship, and let's say they don't have children together, and they've left the home and all the resources to their children, what happens to that dependent spouse? And if it's with that ostensible, well, you can stay in the house as long as you're alive, but then it's like, wait, do they have to pay rent to their stepkids? Do the stepkids have to wait to take possession of the house and all the possessions that are in it? What if the stepmom sells all the possessions that are in it to fund her lifestyle? Like there's so many areas that are just fraught
What
when
if the
you
house needs a new roof? Who
yeah.
pays for it?
Who's pays for that? Right. Exactly. And the way that estate planners are so brilliant in setting up these things to avoid taxes and make it so that, it's generation skipping. But what happens with this step parent that might get caught in the mix?
Oh, and you and I, when we did our 3-part webinar, and one of the sessions was on lifetime planning,
Hmm.
like the acronym is CUPER, Qualified Personal Residence Trust. And those are terrible with blended families, because
Hmm.
if one of them owns the house and they put it into the CUPER and they reserve the right to live there, and one of them, survives, it's the step parent.
Hmm.
Once the CUPER is over, house stays in trust and they have to now pay rent. Okay. That's going to be an annual fight. I mean, it's going to have to be determined by a third party. It's just, there's all kinds of,
Oh, plus there's this way that you end up stuck having to keep being in relationship together when maybe that was not desired, right? Like hopefully been a really great relationship, but
or prudent. I
mhm.
call it sending people to their own financial rooms, like kids, go to
Yeah.
your room. That really,
It's
uh,
so much better to have the money be separate and where you're not dependent on each other or having to be beholden to each other. It's just so much more hard, difficult, especially when you've lost somebody that you love. Yeah.
well, that's right. Now, here was one that in no situation would I have ever agreed to represent a couple jointly,
Mhm.
is if they walked in and said, we have a prenuptial agreement. And it's a very simple reason why. Prenups are some of the most contested agreements in the law.
Mhm.
Now, if well, I know that they both had to be represented by counsel. Okay. It's a very hard process, and in some states, it's almost impossible for for someone to not be represented. That the things they have to sign off on, and sometimes they've got to get a lawyer just to sign off that they were okay signing off on that. And
Mhm.
it gets kind of circular. It is absolutely per se conflict of interest to represent a couple together confecting a prenuptial or a postnuptial agreement.
Oh, so when you're doing their estate plan, they're happily married, may have kids together now, they have kids from other relationships, and they come to you and they're like, "Okay, well, everything's all set. We've already decided all these things. It should be relatively straightforward." You're saying your response is, "It could be straightforward, but you're gonna each need separate counsel because you have a prenup, because
Because they each had
you
a
have to continue that."
lawyer getting the prenup,
Mhm,
and especially if there's estate stuff in it.
mhm.
Now, I can tell you this, if I was the scrivener representing, say, the future wife, and I was the one to draft the prenup, because I drafted a bunch of them, I did a bunch of them. And I was usually always better at doing it than the lawyer on the other side. So they'd come to me, and I'd draft it. Well, if for some reason now the husband says, I don't really like my estate planning lawyer, I want you. And there are lawyers who believe that you can represent a married couple as separate clients and keep everything separate. But I don't have a lot of faith in that
Yeah.
because of the way Rule 1.7 in the Model Rules of
Mhm.
Professional Conduct is written.
Yeah.
And it's a very slippery slope to try to maintain what is, in essence, a fiction. I'm being asked to compartmentalize my brain and my legal files to make sure that the other spouse doesn't find out about what I did for that spouse.
Oh. Yeah, I think that the one thing I would say is if a couple comes to you and they're like, "We trust you. We've done this. We have our prenup. We wanna do our estate plan with you." Would it be possible for them to hire you as a mediator or as a consultant to review their current prenup as it stands, really get a sense of where they are now, what are they still in agreement about this? And also what are their goals for their estate plan? And then giving them some counsel on how to best approach it and how to best work with their independent counsel so that they can stay as a
Oh,
unified
yes. Oh,
front
no. And
because
in fact, I do that now.
I was thinking that that's such a great resource to offer because so many times attorneys, and I mean this with the utmost respect, are trained to be adversarial and to be highly protective. And
Zealous advocate, I think, is the word they like to
sometimes
use.
sometimes it can be counter to the values or the goals of the couple. So having somebody who really understands who you are as a couple, what your values are, what the purpose is, what you want to accomplish, and help you articulate it, help you advocate for yourself with zealous advocates. It's because if you do need to meet with somebody individually, you wanna make sure that they're not just thinking about your protected self-interest, but, most importantly, what does this mean for you as a couple and everything that you're creating and you wanna create together?
Well, I will tell you this, I do that. I will occasionally get asked to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm not, and I'm not bound by the model rules of professional conduct anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't have a
Right, when you have your
privilege,
consultant hat on and you're not bound by that, you can provide that for a
and,
couple. Yeah.
and, and, and I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna make any legal opinions. I'm not gonna do any of that.
Mhm.
But I often get asked to just provide some general counseling or general thoughts about, okay, here's what we, you know,
Mhm.
where are the potential And really, they more come to me not so much for the tax stuff, although every now and then I'll find a big mistake, but it's more the family dynamics piece of it.
Right,
And
right.
where the big disconnect, and I mean, this is kind of an aside, but this is important,
Yeah.
and it's blended family related. And in fact, it's one of
Oh,
the
good.
issues we were going to discuss is in any estate plan, but particularly a blended family estate plan, the handoff. Remember, an agent under a property power of attorney owes an accounting at death of the principal, the person who signed the power of attorney. If that person is from one side of the blended family, but the executor, personal representative of the estate, is on the other side, or somebody who is at loggerheads with administration, can get off to a really rocky start.
That's putting it mildly.
So
Yeah, for sure.
the having that seamless communication, the
Mhm.
handoff,
Yep.
and a lot of times it's worth putting in, and this is sort of a training wheels thing I used to use. Most of these people are best served by using a third party independent trustee.
Mhm.
Okay. But they're like, I don't want to, deal with all that. And now today, thank our friend Marguerite Lawrence and the Independent Trustee Alliance and Dan Felix, all they, Nick Nord out in Napa. Um, those people are great individual trustees, and they're fabulous at this. But you put them in as special just to do this handoff, and then it's like, okay, well, that looks like it's going to be okay. Well, let's just keep them,
Yeah, yeah.
and that worked. And I don't think enough people think about that.
Well, I think too there's I think this is the thing that I'm the strongest advocate for is whatever you end up deciding, if there's anybody in your family that's going to be in a particular role related to your estate plan, is you need to educate them ahead of time and really get clear on like why you think they're qualified for that role. What do they need to do in order to be more qualified for the role? What do they need from you to support them in being successful in the role? I mean, I worked with one family where, the stepmom and her stepdaughter, her husband's daughter, were named as co-trustees and co-executors on the estate, and the dad planned the whole thing with his second wife, with the stepmom, and she was very well aware of it, and he had every intention of telling his daughter, but he died before he did. So she found out at his funeral that she was now in this position of co-executor and co-trustee with her stepmother, and her stepmother knew. So she wasn't prepared at all, and she was so behind because she didn't get a chance to talk to her dad about what his wishes were, why he wanted them to be doing it together. There was no letter of intent or instructions. So I think that that's something for everyone to be aware of is if you're working with somebody and they're designing an estate plan that has steps, uh, doing something together, make sure that they are informed immediately and that there is a nice roadmap for them in terms of how to make sure their communication's solid, transparency of information, and their decision making is really supported and being successful.
I'll be gobsmacked if you haven't heard me tell this story. But when I was a young lawyer, our law firm, not the tax and estate section, but a lawyer down the hall who fashioned himself as a general practitioner, drafted a will with a guy who married 4 times in his life. Wives 2 and 4, his burying spouse, are the same person. So he married her, divorced her, married somebody else, remarried her, and then died.
Died.
He named wife 2-4 and son from wife 1 as co-executors of an estate that had a whole series of operating medical facilities. These two each lawyered up, and after a complete year, 52 consecutive weeks in Rule Day in Calcasieu Parish, 14th Judicial District Court, Judge Blanchard tossed both of them out and named a New Orleans CPA and a Lake Charles lawyer as co-trustees and our co-executors, and then
Oh
the
my
New
goodness.
Orleans CPA hired the competent side of the firm to handle the estate. So, but you're like, why
Who would
would you
do
let
that?
a client sign a document that essentially creates the battlefield for World War III?
Mhm. Happens all the time. Yeah.
And I'm just, I guess I don't get it. The other thing that always chills me to the bone, and especially, and I only had it happen once with a prenup. Information held by one partner off limits. That always, there may be legitimate and obviously government secrets. I mean, like
No,
my
it's more
baby,
like if there's an operating business or,
or,
if there's a
or
closely
something
held
about some
family business
account
or
or some
yeah.
family member,
Mhm.
you can't know anything. Yeah, that, I don't know, that always, and remember, these were signposts of people need to be separately represented.
Separately rented. Yeah.
That's the
Mhm.
thing that bothers me. The only one to talk about one more issue before we go,
Alright.
but it's a hot button one, and it's tangible personal property.
Oh, huge. Yeah, especially because if you only have one of something and you have different family members that want that thing, you're really in trouble. Yeah,
Well,
there's
I can tell you this: when I was married to my son's mom, her mom, her dad had gotten together with a woman who was a couple of years younger than my former mother-in-law. And of course, he died. He left her not only the house, but all of their pictures, china, silver.
everything in the house. Yeah.
Well, my former mother-in-law, of course, I had to hear an earful about that. What can we do? And, you know, you just, there's just not much you can do. What I did was I told her, because her dad was kind of a cat, and, he was, he was one of the eligible bachelors in the Houston area. And, he was that way. But I said, she really gave him, once he, you know, had the slight stroke and fell, and he wasn't able to just, go out and do everything that he did. Said she gave him some really good years. And I said, I know, got the family memories, but, this was something that, he gave her, but she also gave, obviously gave something to
Mhm.
him. And
Wow.
I'm not sure she ever I'm not sure she ever got over that, but
I think
but because it's hard.
it's a good place to start, right? When you can allow your heart to open to, the benefit and the value that that person brought or, you know, there when you have these step family situations, it can be challenging, but if you can go to that place of being grateful, then there can also be an opening to appeal to that person's, empathy and kindness as well. When we have an open heart and we have compassion and empathy for their situation, right? That person lost her husband and went through a sickness with him, and, there's a lot there for her. Um, if there's a way to meet that person there and genuinely, not manipulatively, but
Right.
genuinely, there's much more likelihood that that person might have some empathy coming back and be like, these pictures are more for you than for me, and there's some I want to keep, and that mean a lot to me, but I'd love for you to have these, or and there might be a way to bridge that. I mean, that's what my specialty is, right? Is the kind of the communication and creating bridges across those complex divides that can happen in families.
Yeah, I think, the older I get, and this is sort of concomitant with the, avoid always or never. A
Mhm.
lot of people in these, fight, they go to either or, and I've been guilty of this. Okay. It's not always either or.
Right. There's such a gray area in between.
Some,
Yeah.
sometimes, well, it may eventually be an either or, but the question is it either or right now?
Mhm. And what
Because
can be done to cultivate it? Like, yeah.
because
Sorry.
because a lot of times what you think of as the fork in the road, you walk through, and 2 hours later, it's not nearly what it was.
Mhm. Yeah, there's the thing that we make up in our
We've
heads.
made the mountain out of
Yeah.
the molehill.
Yeah, or, something's happened in the past and we make presumptions about what that means or whether that person cares or not and that sort of thing, and that's why I really am so passionate about, like, authentic trust within family systems, and the more you can, really look at what what can we do to cultivate the kind of trust amongst us so that at the time of somebody's passing, we're able to navigate it well and take care of everybody's concerns from a place of real care for each other.
Now, I think that's absolutely right. When I was growing up in the '60s in Central Louisiana, the world was going crazy for the Beatles and Motown, but I was influenced by what was going on in Memphis, Tennessee, and Stax Records. But the Beatles were absolutely right. In the end, love is all there is.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is a great way for us to end, because it is really all about the heart. The
Yeah.
head is important to make sure you don't end up in the ditch, but the head should never outweigh the heart. Do you think?
I think it's about the blending of the 2. I love the, image of the infinity symbol. It's just
Right.
like, how do you have the 2 work synchronistically, coherently together, right? Where you're making really good, sound, logical decisions, taking into account the emotional dynamics and the heart space of the people that are gonna be impacted by those decisions.
And that requires transparency, it requires
Mhm.
humility, and it requires a feeling of gratitude, and an
Yeah.
attitude of gratitude is something that I'm grateful to have every single day, because
Me
it really
too.
is, when you're grateful, you can't be hateful. And I heard that said many years ago. You can't be hateful
Mhm.
if you're grateful. And
That's
Shorty was
great.
right. All right, Emily, this has been absolutely delightful. I still think there's room for a beyond yours, mine, and ours. So I'm just planting seeds. I know you're busy, maybe cultivating in 2028, but I want
Fun.
you to think about it, because I would love to collaborate again, because I thought I really enjoyed it. And not
Oh,
only did
thank
the
you.
work that we did on the blended family book, but our purposeful prenups, where we basically are
Mhm.
telling lawyers, this is not a zero sum game. It's about planting, tilling a
Mhm.
garden for a nascent relationship that we're trying to nurture, to grow.
Yeah.
And you can't grow if you're throwing spears at each other.
That's true. Yes. Well,
So,
thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
well, like I said, it was all my pleasure, and I can't wait for this one to come out. Talk
Thanks.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye. And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cajun Counselor. This is Paul Hood saying laissez le bon temps rouler. Au revoir.